This is not a new issue, right? This is an issue that came about with television when television came into being. And if you look back to the 60s and 70s, or 50s and 60s, really, late 50s, early 60s, as television became more dominant, theaters really tried to provide an alternative experience, and there was a real move towards large, widescreen format. And you got the films of David Lean and people of that sort really working in large format, sometimes shooting on 65 millimeter and certainly presenting on huge screens. And that worked really well for about 10 years until VHS came out.
If you look at the evolution from film, um, i.e., in the theaters, then when television came in, television was really, a lot of people think that television was kind of an extension from films, etc. It wasn't at all, actually. The complete control and growth of television came from radio, AM radio, in fact. The whole structure of it, the way it was delivered, is entirely driven by advertising, all came from AM radio. And the people who started the first television in North America was RCA, and they kind of controlled radio, and then they controlled television when it started. So that's kind of an evolution of that, and I think the people using the web are trying to sort of do an extension of that now, reinvent some control. The nice thing about the internet is that it's a free zone. That you can put something up, I can put something up, anybody can put something up, whether good or bad. That's the downside. But anybody can put anything up, and that's a whole new freedom that didn't exist before.
There was about 10 years where people were having to shoot for conventional television and for 16:9. And that was a real challenge for someone who was shooting, because you had to decide, what do I cut out or what do I add into the frame? And there were a lot of discussions about how to do that. I think one of the common solutions was to say, okay, we'll keep the headroom the same at the top of the frame. We'll make sure that that's constant, and we'll leave room for adjustment on the bottom and to the sides, so that if you standardize your headroom, you can make it fit either format. You just had to make sure you were wide enough that if it went to the other format, you weren't cutting anything serious out of the frame.
So there are some techniques to making those work better. Color depth, how the color depth of that you set up for, restricting the palette, having less movement, the background. It's all about data flow. So if you can restrict the data flow, if you're shooting smart, then you control the data flow, how much data is going to have to be streamed out there. You can think about the composition, color, etc., and then you can control it to some degree. Yeah. So if it's just a talking head, it's going to be less data than someone running through the woods.
So you do have to consider composition and framing and format to some degree if that's your primary market. But if you're thinking about more than one market, then of course you're going to shoot higher quality and do a low quality version.
Cool.
And when you were working with a small television screen, you were composing largely in close-up medium shot, right? Almost all dialogue in television was medium shot or close-up. Because it's on a small screen. If you went wide, it was just lost. Didn't work. That's changing, right? That's changing, as now we're getting people viewing television on a larger screen. That's less critical than it was. So in some ways, it's freed up. It was really tough as a cinematographer, because you really wanted to know what your audience was going to see, and you were creating for that. If you're doing theatrical work, then you were really shooting for a large screen. If you're doing television work, then you could say, okay, 16:9 is close enough, I can work with that. And I'll assume that sometimes it's going to get cut off, so I just have to make sure that we're not losing anything too critical. But when you go back to the large widescreen films, you can get a situation where when they cut off, you've got both characters out of the frame, right? So that's where pan and scan and so on came from, to try and fix that, but it's awful.
I think when you talk about what are people going to watch, I think they're going to watch things that their peers are watching, that they're sort of the whole social network thing, I think, has a big influence there. You know, I see something and I tell somebody else. That kind of word of mouth, that kind of communication, I think is really probably going to dominate if it doesn't already. Other people, players are trying to get into the market. Broadcasters now coming even from publishers, like the The newspapers have all got websites, and they even now have got content, serial content on it, things like that. So it's really changing, but at the same time, some things are not changing.
I think it depends so much on context. I travel on a train, commuting in the mornings on a GO train, and I see people constantly watching movies, either on computers or on iPhones or on iPads, and so clearly it's become a really pervasive technology. I don't think it's really the preferred screen, but I think it's the most popular or the most used probably at this stage.
I watched it in the theater, and I always prefer to see it that way. It's just finding the time to go, but you get the best sound, especially if you're at a place like the Lightbox. You get the best sound, the best picture. You get to see the whole thing, and it's dark. The main problem is just dealing with other people, like talking or walking around, and sometimes you miss things that way. But I don't know. If I had the choice, that's the way I'd go and see every movie. I definitely got the filmmaker's message, not necessarily a good message, but I definitely got it from seeing the movie.
I watched the movie on a little 4:3 sort of TV. Obviously, the sides were kind of cut off, which sucked. Couldn't get widescreen. It was grainy. The sound was pretty. It wasn't awful, but there was nothing good about it. So yeah, I think they lost a lot with that sort of transition. I don't know. I watched a film. That's all I can really say about it. It wasn't mind blowing or anything. I see the message more through the narrative than necessarily the shots, but the fact that the shots weren't fully realized kind of sucked. I don't know. It wasn't as fun.
So I saw the movie on an iPod. I'm not entirely sure I caught most of it. It really, it was hard to see. The sound was terrible. I don't know. I'd prefer to be in a theater or even, at home watching on a television.
Message.
No idea what the filmmaker's message was. It was super hard to focus or figure out what was going on because they would talk about details that you can't even see on an iPod.